When reading research articles, you're going to come across a whole host of different types of research methodologies. We're going to spend a good bit of time this semester learning about the different types of research methodologies, but for the most part, they can be broken down into two different categories. That's what we're going to learn about in this part of the presentation. If you've read a good bit of research, you've probably noticed that there are two main categories of the types of research that are conducted by individuals in our field, and those are qualitative research and quantitative research. Now, in this course, we're going to spend a good bit of time going over all of the different research designs within qualitative and within quantitative research. But I wanted in this first presentation to go over them so you have an idea of the differences between qualitative studies and quantitative studies. Qualitative studies typically attempt to describe how people behave in their natural environment. So often there is not direct measurements taking. It's observation. We look at opinions. We look at people's feelings, their reasons for why they make the decisions they make. Versus in quantitative research, and the name suggests this, that it's much more data-driven, where we create situations, we take measurements before and after, and it's much more artificial. So qualitative research tends to try to study people in their natural settings, where they normally work, where they work out, where they perform their athletic endeavors, and so on. And in qualitative research, typically the people and their behaviors are studied over a specific time period. The researcher attempts to describe the person's behaviors from the subject's perspective. So what might happen is maybe you wanted to learn more about how people utilize the fitness center. You may observe the people, where do they go first, which equipment do they use most frequently, and so on, and gather some data here to look at how people behave in your gym on an average day. Afterwards, you may interview them and ask them their perspective. Why did you use this machine first? Why did you do this first? Why did you not go to the juice bar, or whatever it may be? And you're attempting to explain their behavior, understand their behavior better by both observing them and then asking them for their opinion. So in qualitative research, we typically observe individuals, then do some type of interviews or engage with the subjects in some way. And when we engage with the subjects, we look for themes. Was there something that a number of the participants mentioned that was in common, that maybe helps explain something? Maybe they went to that specific machine because of its placement. Maybe they went to that specific machine because it was new and shiny. Who knows? But we attempt to look for kind of commonalities in the findings or the comments made by the subjects. Quantitative research is much more artificial and based on data, not necessarily opinions and, again, the people's feelings and so on. Typically in quantitative research, we're going to collect data, do mathematical calculations, run statistics, and so on. It assumes that, again, the measures that we take are going to be governed by natural laws, and that if we see some type of effect of our treatment on a group of people, in this situation, we would see it potentially in a similar situation because that's how the body behaves. That's how the body reacts to this type of stimulus or exercise program and so on. There are typically objective measures taken, and then it uses some type of statistical measures to evaluate those changes in that measure over time. So for example, if I wanted to look at the difference in as we mentioned before, if I wanted to measure the difference in effectiveness of two different types of foam rollers, one that vibrated, one that didn't, on range of motion in the hamstrings, I could measure everybody's hamstring range of motion, give them one day a regular foam roller to use, have them do a set foam rolling program, then measure their range of motion again. And then on another day, I could give them the vibrating foam roller and do the same foam rolling treatment measure range of motion and compare those measures to see which day did they have a greater increase in range of motion. And then I could run statistics to see if those differences were statistically significant. Sorry about that. But anyway, so in qualitative research, we're usually kind of describing how people behave in their natural settings, or when a specific phenomenon or unusual situation occurs. In quantitative research, we're looking to, again, create a study where we're going to collect data and look at the effect of some type of intervention. Some of the common qualitative methodologies that are used are shown on this slide. We're going to go over and see examples of these in future presentations in this course. But I wanted to give you kind of a sense of what type of research might be out there and the kind of information that it can convey. One of the most common types of qualitative methodologies is a type of research called ethnographic research. It's where the researchers will really attempt to better understand a specific culture or a group. The name kind of leads you to believe it's ethnic groups. It certainly can be, but it can really be any specific group. So if you wanted to, kind of go back and look at the experiences of the, U.S. women's soccer team and how they, the different aspects of their preparation that got them ready to win and play so well in the World Cup, you could interview them, talk to them, and that would be the group that you're describing. And you might look to see in those interviews, were there specific parts of their training that they really felt prepared them well? Were there certain parts that prepared them for the stress of playing in this environment, and so on? So you can see how talking to individuals like that, talking to a group, might give us some information that's useful, not only useful for them, but might be useful if we're training our own group of athletes for a high stress type of activity and so on. But that's an example of a qualitative methodology. Specifically, that's ethnographic type of a design. Phenomenological designs typically describe individuals, but how they make sense of some specific experience. So again, I often have seen these types of research done when individuals are interviewed about something that happened in their environment. So maybe you see on the news a story about an earthquake, but how people responded, how they helped out, who stepped up and took charge. And again, by interviewing those individuals, it can help us prepare for those types of events in the future. Narratives typically describe one individual and how they made meaning or what they took away from a specific experience. So similar to either ethnographic or phenomenological, but it's instead of looking at a group of people, it's looking at one individual. So it's more of a story. And again, because it's only on one individual, it maybe doesn't describe the population or a group as well. People are less likely to necessarily respond the same way, but it can still convey some useful information. Qualitative document analysis and critical discourse analysis are where the researcher will actually go in and look at already existing either written documents or videos, recordings, etc., in the case of critical discourse analysis, with the hope of uncovering relationships and important information about a specific population or about a specific event. All of these methodologies, again, focus more on the narrative. What happened? How did people interpret it? As opposed to focusing on numbers. Not that numbers can't be used, but mostly we're looking for how people respond to specific types of situations. Quantitative methodologies and designs very different than qualitative. Qualitative research often occurs in the natural environment. We aren't manipulating things. We aren't doing things to people. We're asking them about an experience, their expectations for an experience, and then their expectations after an experience, and looking for themes, looking for commonalities within the group. Quantitative methodologies are much more artificial, where we design a scenario to test the effect of some type of intervention. So typically, we are manipulating the environment, manipulating what our subjects are doing, and looking at their response to those manipulations. The different types of methodologies, and again, we're going to see a lot of good examples of these in this class, include potentially tests and survey reports. In these types of studies, we don't actually manipulate something necessarily. What we do is we gather data on typically a large group of people and summarize the information about the subjects, and then we can break them into groups to compare, males and females, people based upon age, etc., to look for differences between the groups. But those would be examples of test or survey reports where you're basically just taking summary data and comparing groups and making inferences based upon that. Experiments are what we're going to see probably most frequently in our field, where the goal of the authors, the researchers, is to investigate cause and effect. So the example I used earlier of a foam roller, that would be an experiment. We are going to look to see, does this treatment or varying treatments, like 2 different types of foam rollers, cause some change or some alteration in some measure. The example I used was range of motion. And is one better than the other? Is one more effective in increasing our outcome or improving our outcome over another? So in experiments, the authors are typically looking to investigate cause and effect, and they're looking to see which type of intervention is going to be most beneficial on the group that's studied. These need to be well designed to really get us to the answer that we want to get. And please remember, on experiments, even if we do not find a relationship, that's still useful information. So if we were to find that one foam roller worked way better than the other, that's great, because that tells us, hey, we should probably use this type of foam roller. If we find no difference between the 2 foam rollers, but they both work, that's great too, because it tells us we don't have to spend the extra money on the vibrating foam roller, or we can use whichever one we have available to us. So again, please remember that a non-significant effect sometimes can be beneficial. Good information also. Non-experimental group comparisons allow us, are designs where we measure and evaluate differences between 2 groups. So it's where we don't necessarily experiment on them, but we can measure, before and after things, depending upon their workout. So if you happen to have, access to 2 different athletic teams, one coach uses one training technique, another coach uses another training technique, you could actually measure something before in the group, the sprint speed of your athletes, measure it after, and it gives you an opportunity, without creating an experiment, to see if there is some difference in that group based upon something that just naturally exists within the group. And then correlations research measures how much one measure may affect another measure. So, again, maybe we want to increase a person's jump height. If we know that by increasing quadricep muscle strength, we can cause an increase in jump height because those 2 factors are correlated, then again, we know that we can focus on increasing quad strength and we'll see a benefit. So correlation research measures how much one measure may affect another measure, and can be, again, another type of design that's done later on. We're going to see lots of examples of each of these research methodologies as we move forward in this class. And again, that I think will help you really understand what these different terms means.